Good afternoon. I know we're starting 35 minutes late. I want to ask all of us to please turn our cell phones to silent. You may notice board members accessing their laptops during the meeting. They are using the laptops to access board meeting materials that are in electronic format. This is an official business of the Medical Board of California. As such, disruptions of the board's business will not be tolerated. We have a designated time on the agenda for public comment, and I will ask for public comment on each agenda item. I ask that you be respectful of the need to conduct board's business. Should anyone disrupt the meeting, I will ask that person to conduct him or herself in such a manner that permits the board to transact its business. The meeting will be available via teleconference. Individuals listening to the meeting will have an opportunity to provide public comment and will be assisted by a moderator who will be facilitating the teleconference process. For those members of the public participating via teleconference, please wait until the moderator has introduced you before you make your comments. To request to make a comment during the public comment period, press *1. You will hear a tone indicating you are in the queue for comment. If you change your mind, do not want to make a comment, press *2. Assistance is available throughout teleconference meeting. To request a specialist, press *0. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes per agenda item. During agenda item 2, public comments on items not on the agenda, the board has limited the public comment period for individuals on the teleconference to 20 minutes. In addition, the public comment for a comment from individuals here at the meeting will be also limited to 20 minutes. Therefore, after 20 minutes, no further comments will be accepted. During public comment on any other agenda item, 10 minutes will be allowed for comments from individuals on the teleconference and those in the audience. After 10 minutes, no further comments will be accepted. Business Services Office staff will be assisting me with receiving the public comments via teleconference during this meeting. The board welcomes public comments on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comments prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. If for some reason I forget to ask for public comment on an agenda item and you wish to speak on that item, please raise your hand or come forward and you will be recognized. I would like to request all speakers to complete a presenter slip so I can call you by name at the appropriate time and the record of this meeting can be full and complete. However, this is voluntary. Please give the speaker slip to Ms. Cruz Jones. I will do my best to call upon everyone who has supplied a slip for the agenda item and recognize those who wish to make last-minute comment. I want to remind all speakers to please stay on the topic and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. We planned the end meeting today around 5:30 p.m. We'll see if you go there. I'd like to ask Ms. Kirschmeyer to introduce individuals in the audience. Kim, please introduce.
Yes, I'd actually like to introduce Lynn Forsyth, who's the Executive Officer of the Physician Assistant Board.
Lynn, welcome. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask Ms. Cruz Jones, please call the roll call.
Dr. Bolott?
Present.
Dr. Hawkins?
Here.
Dr. Kraus?
Here.
Ms. Lawson? Dr. Levine? Dr. Lewis?
Present.
Ms. Pines?
Here.
Ms. Sutton-Wills? Mr. Warmoth?
Here.
Ms. Wright?
Here.
Dr. Yip?
Here.
Dr. Gonadev?
Here. The quorum is present. I would like to remind the members again that we will be taking roll call vote on all action items. Moving to agenda item 2, public comments on items not on the agenda. Do we have any slips, Kim?
Not for this item.
Any comments from the public? People here in the audience. Any comments on the phone?
Yes, we do have some comments. Our first comment comes from Nicola Avilla. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nika. I've been a licensed massage therapist for the last 19 years.
I massage between 20 and 25 people on an average a week, and I've been massaging Susan Lauren for a year now. Her body does not feel like other bodies that I've massaged in the past. She's missing tissue in her body, and I'm sorry, I'm driving because I've been on hold. She's missing parts of her gluteus, hamstrings, and IT bands and trochanter, therefore showing deformity, and they're clearly due to the surgery. Her tissue has no elasticity and is overly sensitive. Susan is a very smart, bright, intelligent woman who, through conversations I know, was accustomed to a very healthy and active lifestyle, and I cannot imagine that she would have ever possibly agreed to the kind of surgery that this doctor performed on her.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, we have a comment from Marian Hollingsworth. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Marian Hollingsworth, and I'm representing myself today. In light of the Me Too and Times Up movement, I would like to request that the Medical Board of California take up the issue of requiring doctors on probation for sexual misconduct to tell their patients. If you remember, last year the board voted to endorse a bill that would have required patients to be notified. Unfortunately, that measure failed in the legislature due to interference from the California Medical Association, the doctor lobby group, which only represents about 1/3 of doctors in the state. However, you don't need a bill or permission from your friends in the CMA to require doctors found responsible for sexual misconduct to tell their patients. You can decide for yourselves. Executive Director Kimberly Kirchmeier told me in my doctor complaint that the medical board can make exceptions in any case. This means that part of any discipline can include a condition to notify patients. The board has done this before with doctors in gross negligence cases, so there is no reason why you can't make this requirement for sexual assault cases. We're not talking about a lot of doctors here. Your annual report says you've only put 6 doctors on probation for sexual misconduct that last year. That's only 6 out of the 135,000 that are licensed in California. Now, the medical board says its mission is to protect patients, but you are not doing your job if you let these doctors hide their discipline. Women and men, too, can't even protect themselves and make decisions in their own care if they don't know about their doctors. Now, don't say the information is on your website, because the reality is no one is going to look up their doctor before every single appointment like you expect them to, even if they are aware of Breeze. And given that you say you're still missing some 15,000 documents as of a year ago, Breeze is not always accurate. Don't be part of the problem by protecting these Harvey Weinsteins of the medical world. This is a decision that affects everyone on this board. I can't imagine any woman on this board being okay with not knowing if her doctor is on probation for sexual misconduct. And I can't imagine any man on the board not wanting to protect his wife, daughter, sister, or mother. You can do this yourselves. The Time's Up movement says no more silence. You don't need people from the Me Too or Time's Up movements to get involved in this issue to convince you, although I have no problem contacting them to discuss the problem. I hope you decide on your own to have these doctors notify their patients, or at least take up an agenda item at your next meeting in Los Angeles. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, we have another comment from Eric Andrus. Go ahead.
First, I was waiting online in the last meeting to speak at the end, and they shut down the meeting without allowing me to. This after Carrie Webb was cutting off people in the October meeting at 2 minutes instead of at 3. Carrie, I realize you have a duty to request that callers don't talk about open complaints, but you cannot enforce that. According to the Brown Act, the public can talk about anything they want at a public meeting as long as it's on topic. So you need to stop telling people that they can't talk about open complaints, because it's just not true. And I'd like my 40 seconds back that you took away from me at the last meeting. I mailed a packet of information to the hotel in San Diego to Kimberly Kirchmeier to pass out to each of you, and I want to make sure you all got those. Due to the delay in the video, I can't see you raise your hands. Secondly, have any of you ever been to our website at forpatientsafety.org and seen our database that mirrors the information available and not available on Breeze? Do you think that's responsible as members of the board, that it's supposed to be protecting the citizens of this state? To illustrate problems with your website, medical board grammatical errors are rampant. Does no one proofread these documents? Do you not have spell check applications on your computers? A recent accusation said, failing to documenting the results of echo or spinal x-ray she ordered. It should have read, failing to document the results of an echo or spinal x-ray that she ordered. Then on the very next page, they copied and pasted the exact same sentence, including the errors. In the same document, one section is lettered A, B, and then B again, and then they copied and pasted it in the next section down with the mistake included. I found one the other day that Kimberly Kirkmeyer signed that was dated in the year 3015, right directly above her signature. In December, Christina Lawson put her signature on two separate decisions that had the effective and ordered dates reversed. Clearly, someone just copied and pasted the mistake from one document to the other, and Christina didn't bother to read them carefully and rubber stamped her signature to them. They later had to be corrected. A clerk typist for the state of California makes over $50,000 a year and is allowed to get by with all kinds of mistakes. I do all this for no money at all. You all should be ashamed for not being more careful and taking your time to actually read these documents. Do you really think that you can just sit there on your hands all the time, especially the non-doctors on the panel, ignoring the public when they bring important issues of non-protection and law breaking to your attention, like we're just annoying gnats on the wall? The superiority is just unconscionable, and you should all be ashamed. You've all been told that your own lawyer is breaking the Public Records Act law, and no one seems to care. You just sit back and let it happen. One would think at the very least you'd get sick of me bringing it up all the time and would want to deal with it once and for all. Recently, I sent in some public document requests and got a letter back from an Alexandria Shimbra, public affairs analyst. In her reply, she states that my request will require the board to search for, collect, and examine a voluminous amount of records and needed to extend the due date 2 weeks. This request was for a doctor's disciplinary document that should already be viewable in Breeze, but is missing. It
Please
should already
conclude.
exist online, so why would they need to look through a voluminous amount of records to find it and need more time to do so? A second request for a disciplinary document resulted in another letter from Alexandria, this time stating that they were unable to locate the documents. So documents required by law
Andres,
are not
please
only missing
conclude.
from Breeze, but
Please
the board is
conclude.
incapable of finding them. Will there be any accountability for this transgression? Of course not. The medical board is without accountability.
Please
It's
conclude.
disgusting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the phone?
Yes, we have another comment from Fred Gardner. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Gardner, go ahead.
I'm speaking for the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. The FCC is requesting that the medical board at its next meeting include a discussion of both appendices to the guidelines for the recommendation of cannabis for medical purposes. Appendix 1, the decision tree, contradicts the guidelines by making cannabis a treatment of last resort after standard prescriptions have failed, whereas the guidelines state, quote, a patient need not have failed on all standard medications in order for a physician to recommend or approve the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes, close quote. This is an obvious and embarrassing error, and it seems odd that the decision tree can't be deleted immediately or amended by staff to reflect the guidelines themselves. The agreement was modeled on a document in which patients being prescribed narcotic opioids acknowledged the risks. Cannabinoid users do not face equivalent risks. The SCC will provide a more realistic draft of an agreement for the board's consideration. We are asking for time to discuss it, an agenda item at the April meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments on the phone?
Yes, we do have another comment from Susan Lauren. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, I called earlier and I was cut off, and before you start timing me, I'd like to know why I was cut off. I'm a member of the public, and my understanding is that I can call and talk in a public meeting so that there is transparency, at least a tiny bit, with what's going on with the board. So please tell me why I was cut off, and then I'll start again.
Ma'am, at the time, it appeared that you were talking about an open complaint that may come before the board for a decision. And it's my understanding, after clarifying, that complaint is closed. And so you are free to talk about it.
And I have things to talk to the public about it. And I have a prepared speech. And if for some reason you're going to silence me on that, then it's a good thing that my legislators are listening, and I'd like to take 3 minutes and talk about other things, but I feel that I should be able to legally, ethically, and morally, as a member of the public, talk about items that concern me. So please tell me why I'm unable to do that, and then give me my 3 minutes, and I'll figure out which way to use them.
You may talk about a closed complaint.
And since my complaint is open, so I'll talk about other things regarding the issues. Okay? I'd like to talk about a doctor that works for your board. He's a TV surgeon, and he reviews cases for you. My understanding is for 25 years. Now, during a legal deposition regarding my mutilation, he boasted that he made $3,000 an hour as an expert witness and joked, "Why do you think they call it plastic surgery?" In his reviews, people lament, why is he even licensed? He lied in court, leaving me at risk for homelessness, and because I'm mutilated and disabled from the surgery that was unconsented, and via the endorsement of your board, the jury listened to him. So I'm asking, and I'm asking legislators who are listening and you, that it's imperative that your board clean house of unscrupulous doctors. Since I can't talk about my case right now, I'd like to talk about the Me Too movement as well. Time's up for surgical mutilations of people that go in either for breast reduction or other plastic and reconstructive surgeons. These board-certified surgeons are given carte blanche, and you can read the article in Anesthesiology Now, May 2012. They say that for the last several decades, nothing has changed. Liposuction is as dangerous as it was. I'd like to request time at another meeting to talk about liposuction code, I think it's 1356.6. I'm not sure of the number. But this liposuction has long-term health and contour consequences that people don't get. I don't have a prepared speech, and I'm shaken because you cut me off before, and I'm in, agonizing pain since November 8th, 2011. So I may not be speaking my best, but surgeons are doing procedures that are against need and consent. While men and women are unconscious under anesthesia, they're not medically justified. They're going on egregious sculpting trips, and then they're covering up what they're doing. I started a group called Lipo Coalition. You may have heard of it, and I hope so. And I hope that more people will hear about it. And what it is that a lot of people in California especially, but all over this country and in different countries, are being harmed by board-certified plastic surgeons, and there's cover-ups. And I'm a witness to it directly. It's reprehensible, and sadly, I don't expect you to do the right thing, but I really hope that you do, because there's no justification, and there's no mitigating circumstances. Nobody in their right mind would excuse these intolerable violations. And the litigation process is used to antagonize, victim blame, skin shame, and slander people that are already victimized. There are under limits gag clauses, and then they try to gag you after trial, and then they bill you for trial. And this is what happens if you're unfortunate enough to go to a surgeon highly recommended by your physician, and who doesn't use common sense, who doesn't understand the body, who doesn't do anything according to plan.
Please conclude.
Try to cover up. And the medical board would be the place, you would think.
Please conclude.
Huh?
Please conclude.
Okay, I'd like to know if I can call again tomorrow, and I can have something prepared, because I had something else prepared today, and I wasn't able to read it, so I am winging it right now.
Yes.
Is a person allowed to call again?
Yes.
And it's at 9 a.m.?
Yes.
Okay, and I can't talk about my case because it's open now.
That's correct.
And this time you're going to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the phone?
No further comments.
Thank you. Let's move to the next agenda item, approval of minutes from October 2017 board meeting. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, any comments or corrections from the board? Okay, any public comments in the audience? Any comments on the phone?
Yes, we do have a comment from Stephen Robinson. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm a member of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, and I'd like to make note that the Society of Cannabis Clinicians would like to submit commentary to the Medical Board of California regarding their guidelines for the recommendation of cannabis for medical purposes. In particular, the SCC feels that their Appendix 1 decision tree is flawed in that it specifically contradicts established medical board policy, which states on page 4, a patient need not have failed on all standard medications in order for a physician to recommend or approve the use of cannabis for medical purposes. The process illustrated in the newly adopted appendix strongly suggests that the decision to use medicinal cannabis should be considered only after the failure of standard therapy. We believe the decision tree as presented is a retreat from the relatively progressive position the Medical Board of California has already adopted. We have proposed a revision to the decision tree, which is more in line with existing board policy, and we would like the MBC to correct the guidelines as posted on their website to align with their existing policy, and to place this item as an agenda item for further discussion with either the Medical Marijuana Task Force or with the board as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the phone?
Yes, we do have another comment from Eric Andrus. Go ahead.
First, I tried to punch back in at the end of opening comments and they wouldn't let me in again. Carrie, you need to stop telling people they can't talk about open complaints. You need to quote a law if you're going to tell people that, because according to the Brown Act, we can talk about anything we want. So why don't you tell us right now why we can't talk about open complaints? Hello? Anybody there?
Mr. Andrus, I've already provided you authority in writing.
You have not.
This comes down to the
You're
evidence.
making that up, Carrie. You have not.
Thank you for your comment.
I have a comment on the minutes.
Go ahead, Mr. Andrus, finish up.
Whoever puts together the minutes usually does an excellent job, and with a great deal of specificity about what everyone says. But I noticed this time that something was suspiciously and conspicuously missing. Had there not been such specificity in general, this wouldn't be an issue. But because there is, I feel it is an issue. In going back and watching the video at timestamp 10 minutes 22 seconds through 10 minutes 45 seconds, where I was talking about Dr. Hari Reddy sexually assaulting 4 female patients, including a 15-year-old girl, the minutes reflect that very accurately. However, when I get to the part that Dr. Dev Gananadev, your board president, sat on the panel that restored this sex offending doctor's license, and that Dev went on to partner up with his brother-in-law, Prem Reddy, and accepted a $40 million donation for his new medical school, that information is conspicuously missing from the minutes. Why is that? Did Dr. Ganadev ask for that to be left out, or did Secretary Ronald Lewis exclude my comments out of his own accord? Either way, it's wrong, and that needs to be corrected. In leaving it out, you've required it to be spoken about again publicly, and it'll have to be reflected in the minutes for this meeting as well. A quick side note, it's also suspicious that when I was talking about Dev and his buddies Hari and Prem Reddy, the sound started fading out and returned when I was done speaking. I suggest that not be a regular occurrence, Mr. Soundman. Also, at timestamp 31 minutes 55 seconds through 32 minutes 10 seconds, I talk about how our new website is better than Breeze and give the web address for our website. That web address was not included in the minutes. Because our website helps keep patients safe when your website fails, that information is important and should be in the minutes. It's again suspicious that it was purposely left out, and I ask that it be included. The web address is bit.ly, bit.ly.com/doc, COT, CAUGHT. On page 7 of the minutes, Prem Reddy's first name is misspelled. It's PREM, not PRIM. And finally, on page 40, it points out that I asked for the Public Records Act issue to be put on the agenda, and again, it was not. I have now asked at the 5 meetings for it to be included on the agenda, and you continually ignore my request. I'll be asking for it again tomorrow, and will continue to ask for it and point it out when you don't include it until it is finally added. And people, go ahead and talk about open complaints, because Carrie is wrong about this. A public meeting, you can talk about anything publicly, so just go ahead and talk about it.
Any other comments?
No further comments.
Thank you. Ms. Cruz-Jones, roll call, please.
Dr. Bolott?
Here.
Dr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Kraus? Dr. Lewis?
Present.
Ms. Pines?
Aye.
Mr. Warmoth?
Aye.
Ms. Wright?
Aye.
Dr. Yip? Dr. Gonadev?
Aye.
I meant aye.
Motion carries. Agenda item 4, President's Report, including notable accomplishments and priorities. Ms. Pines and I also had calls with the executive staff to discuss the meeting agenda and other board projects. In addition, calls were also made between myself and the executive staff to review issues that had come to attention of the board. Our communication is very important to ensure we are aware of any concern that arise. In order to even out the members on Panel A and Panel B, Ms. Sutton-Wills will join Panel A. This will be effective Monday. Thank you, Ms. Sutton-Wills. We'll miss you on Panel B. This morning, the strategic plan was finalized. At this point, staff will work on the finishing touches and provide final document at the April board meeting. I look forward to implementation in the next 4 years. I think that it was thoroughly devised and comprehensive plan that will help consumers of California. Lastly, I want to thank our staff on a job well done in reviewing this year's annual report. There was a significant amount of work that was completed. I'm proud of the work this board and the staff. We issued more revocations and surrenders combined than any year in the last 14 years. In addition, we placed more individuals on probation too. We also issued more licenses. It was a very successful year. I encourage all members to ensure that they review the board's annual report. Over the next quarter, I'll be meeting with the Governor's Office on issues left from our sunset review, including vertical enforcement program and the expert reviewer program. We want to ensure we're part of the process in resolving these issues. I'll provide the updates to the board as the meetings occur. I also want to congratulate our 2 new staff members, Deputy Director Christine Lally and the licensing chief, April Alameda. Oh, there is April. Welcome to Medical Board. Are there any questions from the members on the President's report? Any public comments from the audience in the audience here? Comments on the phone?
No comments.
Thank you. Moving to the agenda item 5, board member communications with interested parties. Do any members have anything to report? Okay. As my usual report, that is, I do meet with several members of and the advocacy groups like CMA, AMA, and Governor's Office and DCA, and that's my job. Any comments in the audience? Any comments on the phone?
No comments from the phone.
Okay, thank you. The next item is agenda item 6, executive management reports. Ms. Kirschmeyer.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start my report by congratulating, Deb actually took the wind out of my sails, congratulating Miss Alameda, who was appointed as a Chief of Licensing in December. As most members know, with Miss Alameda's leadership and assistance, the board's licensing unit has been able to keep the number of days to review an application at 28 for almost a year now. We are happy to have her join the board's executive management, and congratulations. I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce the board's new public information officer. He's sitting in the back taking pictures here, Mr. Carlos Villatoro. Mr. Villatoro has hit the ground running and has begun to revise the board's newsletter, provide more information through the board's Twitter account, and is getting ready to do some podcasts and videos on the board in the future. He will be bringing several new innovative ideas to the board's Public Outreach, Education, and Wellness Committee at a future meeting. So welcome aboard. As normal, I will not be going over all of the summaries unless someone has a question. However, there are a few items I would like to bring to the board's attention. The first is that, as you can see on page BRD 6A5, the board is still unable to obtain any budget detail due to the Department of Consumer Affairs switching over to a new accounting database. We are uncertain as to when these reports will be received, but until those reports are received, we're actually unable to provide any information on the board's expenditures for fiscal year 17-18. We're hopeful that these reports actually will be received soon, though. Another budgetary issue that we have discussed with Dr. Ghana, Deb, and Ms. Pines is the budget increase to the Health Quality Investigation Unit. And Ms. Cruz-Jones is going to be handing out a chart that Dr. Ghana, Deb, and Ms. Pines had requested be provided. As you may remember, when the board had to move the investigators over to the Department of Consumer Affairs, the board had to identify the funding needed for the program at DCA. At that time, the board identified that this program was costing the board approximately $15,498,000. Since the investigators have moved to DCA, that budget has actually increased to $19,528,000. At the request of the board president and vice president, we wanted to provide a chart that identifies the increase in funding. As you can see, the last fiscal year, the HQIU did not spend its full budget, though, of $1 million due to the vacancies. And we're unsure how the spending will be this year because we don't have any reports, as neither does HQIU. But I would assume that they won't spend their full budget as well because of those vacancies. However, as you can see from the chart, there is a significant increase over the years, but specifically I wanted to go over those to just kind of clarify that. The adjustments really were made in 17-18, and it's going to be an ongoing adjustment. It's roughly $2.4 million to HQIU. With this increase, there is a possibility that even with the board's general fund loan repayment that may happen, the board may need to look at a fee increase in the near future. The information regarding this increase was not obtained until after the release of the board materials, so we will provide updated reports on the fund condition at the next meeting. We did talk to the Department of Consumer Affairs budget office, and these increases at HQRU are really due to, over the time since 2016, HQIU getting about a 19% salary increase since that time if you add them all together, as well as salary and benefits adjustments. And then it doesn't just impact the sworn investigators, there's also their med consultants and really their office technicians, and all of their staff got the same increases that the medical board staff got, with like a 4% depending on their union representation, which bargaining unit they're in, as the increase. And then some of those staff also got the $2,500 increase that was given to the state employees in certain categories. So all of that added up to what you have in front of you. So you also may remember that at the October board meeting, Ms. Nichols provided information during her presentation about the increased salary. With the governor's budget release, we now have the numbers to determine what that impact was to the board's fund condition. So at the next meeting, we'll be providing an updated fund condition based on this new release of the information. Moving on, we're excited to let the members know that we will be moving to a new system for voting on board cases. We will be using the Breeze system to vote. We will be providing one-on-one training to all of the members in the near future to get that voting process ready for release. You will be contacted by our Information Systems branch to set up that training. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. As stated at the last meeting, the board may still have to relocate our offices in Sacramento. We've been providing information to the landlords and our meeting in February to discuss the items that we've actually requested from them. We've been keeping staff informed of the process, and as stated last time, again, we don't want to move, but we may need to if the building cannot meet our needs. I also wanted to let the members know that California will be working with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, on a pilot program to provide notifications to physicians of large public health-related issues. Through this pilot, the board would distribute, on behalf of FDA, high-importance drug safety communications to the licensees. This would only occur about 3 to 4 times per year. Again, we don't want to inundate physicians so they don't look at those and see the importance of them. But this is something that we actually already do for other state and federal entities. And when we were contacted by the Federation of State Medical Boards, we said we'd be more than happy to be a part of the pilot. Again, since we already send out these notices, I don't believe it would be any significant increase in workload for the board, but it actually has a great benefit for consumer protection. And then finally, as you all know, the Federation of State Medical Boards' next meeting is in North Carolina in April. Although we aren't allowed to travel to this state, we are hoping that the Federation will be providing opportunities to attend the meeting via teleconference or video conference, including the House of Delegates meetings where the board president gets to vote. As more information is received from the Federation, I will keep the members informed. And then I also wanted to inform the members that based on a survey of state medical boards, this just came out as a press release by the Federation, the top important regulatory issues to state medical boards are telemedicine and opioid prescribing. In addition, physician stress and burnout, marijuana for medicinal purposes, and the Interstate Compact completed the Federation's top 5 issues for state boards. And I think that we would actually agree with most of these as our top issues, as well as we, move forward in our plans. So with that, that concludes my report, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kirschmeyer. Any comments from the board? I do want to make one. I think that's why we wanted the board to see. We did hear before that one of the reasons why we had vacancies was the pay structure in HQIU. So the curve is too steep, but that's not the one which bothered me most. What bothered me most is the time frames. It went from 310 in 2014, 15 to 513, 17 and 18. So if it is a private industry, you spend more and it gets worse, it doesn't count. So that's why I just want everybody to see where the problems are and how we can fix. I know we heard through in the enforcement committee what it takes, but my answer is everything has a process. I do understand that's what legal structure is, but we have responsibility to get these times down for the sake of consumer protection. So we need to work it out. We got to analyze it. It's data analytics and really see where the problems are, how we can fix them, and if it needs legislative fix, bring it to the board. That's what board's job is. So that's why I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of how we are failing in spite of throwing more money at it. So that's the point I want to make.
And I think that money will really come in this next year is where it's going to come in with that 7.44% increase that Ms. Nichols spoke about last time.
Dr. Lewis.
Yes, Jen. We all know there is a process. There are members of the bargaining unit. Oh, yes, there is a process for members of the bargaining unit, which is sometimes problematic with there's budgetary restrictions. And you do have a senator who's chair of Budget B&P. And I don't know if we've approached her. I think it's Strickland. Where's Jennifer? Not here. I think it's Strickland. She's over budget for, I think, boards and everything else. I know she's part of CDCR. We can, go before her and see if we can get more money. But, when you're part of the bargaining unit, you're restricted by the contract. unfortunately.
And I think what this chart is showing, and I think Ms. Nichols would agree, is that finally, that they're starting to get some of that additional money for the great work that they do. And that's what is impacting our budget then, though, because, you know, everyone was supportive of, you know, Ms. Nichols and putting these things forward. And so, but it does have that impact to our budget. And I think that's why Dr. Gonadev wanted to point that out.
Yeah, just for SQIU and our staff is that take whatever it takes. We do have to get those timelines down. Period. It's not an option. That's what our job is, and we can't fail. We are extremely successful when it comes to licensing, and we got a problem when it comes to discipline and timelines. I went through the entire presentation you made. I totally understand, but it's our job to make it more efficient. So you figure out, we bring it to the board, and it's our job to give you whatever resources are needed to do your job. So that's all I want to make sure that we are publicly aware of. Any comments from the audience? Comments on the phone?
Yes, we have a comment from Eric Andrus. Go ahead.
Dr. Lewis, you've been to how many of these meetings now and you still don't know how to use the microphone? Also, why does the cameraman keep focusing on the table apron when the callers call in? We want to see the board members' reactions, or if they're not paying attention, not the medical board sign. Last year, the medical board admitted that staff in the Discipline Coordination Unit has restored nearly 7,000 disciplinary documents to the board's website to ensure compliance with Assembly Bill 1886. Staff will continue efforts in 2017 to complete this project, as there are approximately 15,000 additional documents that need to be restored. How many public documents are still missing from Breeze? Does anybody know? If it took you over 3 years to restore 7,000 documents, that's about 2,300 per year. Is it really going to take you another 6.5 years to get all the documents restored? In the meantime, the public can't see these 15,000 documents, and that is not public safety. In comparison, I created a whole new website and uploaded every single discipline listed in your alerts between 2016 and 2018, a total of 403 alerts and over 1,200 doctors in just 10 months. That includes downloading and making each PDF document searchable for the public, which the medical board chooses not to do, by the way. Heaven forbid they do something that actually helps consumers get through these documents that are so difficult to decipher. We have nearly 3,000 disciplinary documents now in our archive, which will never disappear like they do on your website. Withdrawals and public reprimands will remain on our website forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the phone?
No comments from the phone.
Thank you. Moving to the agenda item 7, update on FSMB work group to study regenerative and stem cell therapy practices. Dr. Krause.
Thank you, Dr. Gnanadev. The Federation of State Medical Boards is a national organization composed of representatives of each state's medical and osteopathic boards. It's a terrific resource for state board members to learn what's going on in other states. One of the beauties of the United States of America is that each state is its own social experiment. And sometimes when we sit in our board meetings, we feel that we're the first to face a new problem and we have to be the first to figure out how to fix it. So participation in the FSMB is vital for every state to learn from one another, to learn in advance what works, what doesn't work, and what works best, and for us to share our common problems. Earlier in 2017, I was appointed to the FSMB Workgroup to study regenerative and stem cell therapy practices because a problem has been perceived, not only by the FSMB, but nationally, and that is that some stem cell and regenerative therapy centers may be placing consumers at risk, promoting, offering, and selling unproven, sometimes painful or dangerous therapies. The question is, how may they be reformed, limited, or closed without harming access to bona fide treatments and or clinical trials at the same time? In March of 2017, the New England Journal of Medicine published a case series of 3 patients, blinded by injections of so-called stem cells derived from the patient's fat administered at a self-promoting stem cell treatment center in Florida. As you may know, the FDA is trying to find a way of controlling stem cell treatment centers, and certainly this has been an issue addressed by this committee for the FSMB. This committee is drafting a report, but has not yet created official recommendations. Those will be discussed at the April meeting of the FSMB, which we will participate in remotely. So for the draft document which has existed to date, I will share with you some of the recommendations that may come out from the document that will be approved in April. One is likely to be a recommendation that state medical boards raise awareness among licensees of applicable federal and state legislation and guidelines regarding regenerative and stem cell therapies, including right to try legislation existing or pending at the state and federal levels. State medical boards should also keep their licensees and the public apprised of new developments and regulations in the field of regenerative and stem cell therapies. This may include educational resources, guidance documents, and appropriate industry and stakeholder information on a state medical board's website. State medical boards should further provide information as to reporting procedures of adverse reactions related to stem cell interventions. There will likely also be a recommendation that state medical boards examine their policies and rules addressing informed consent, and the physicians should be prepared to support any claims made about benefits of treatments or devices with documented evidence, for example, with studies published in peer-reviewed publications. We did find in numerous cases that we reviewed on the FSMB that in many cases there is a inadequacy of informed consent. So it's vital for us to reanalyze that. It's likely that it will be recommended that state medical boards should review professional marketing materials and claims, including any office, clinic, and or doctor websites, and information publicly available about an office or clinic or licensee on online blogs or social media in relation to stem cell and regenerative therapies. There will likely be a recommendation that state medical boards should proactively monitor warning letters sent by the FDA to practitioners because there is a publicly available FDA website that lists practitioners who have received such warnings. This will allow us to have greater insight and to be able to actively investigate a California licensee who may have received an FDA warning. It'll likely be recommended that where evidence is unavailable for a particular treatment in the form of clinical trials or case studies, that physicians will be admonished only to proceed with an appropriate rationale for the proposed treatment and justification of its use in relation to the patient's symptoms or conditions, and that novel, experimental, or unproven interventions should only be proposed when traditional or accepted proven treatment modalities have been exhausted. It is also likely that there will be a recommendation from the FSMB that physicians should refrain from charging excessive fees for treatments provided. I'm personally aware of fees in the tens of thousands of dollars for unproven remedies. Further, physicians should not recommend, provide, or charge for unnecessary medical service, nor should they make intentional misrepresentations to increase the level of payment they receive. I'd like to reemphasize that the final recommendations won't be drafted until the April meeting, and that furthermore that you should recognize that the FSMB is a body that offers recommendations. It is not a body that has any legislative or regulatory authorities, but certainly the opportunity to participate in this work group is a great opportunity for our board and for me personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krause. Actually, thank you for your work. It is a new area where we should be focusing on. Anytime there is scientific advance, there is always going to be snake oil salesman. I mean, this is one of the biggest advances it's going to be the genomics. And unfortunately, always someone thinks that they know without scientific evidence, which can harm, as you mentioned, some people went blind. I mean, this is scary, but thank you for your hard work. Any other questions for Dr. Kraus? Any comments from the audience? Comments on the phone?
No comments from the phone.
Thank you. Well, now we'll go to next item on the agenda is agenda now item 8, presentation by Dr. Stephen Henry from University of California, Davis on the report from the Cure Survey. Dr. Henry's full biography is in BRD 8-1. At UC Davis, Dr. Henry helps to train primary care residents and does research on chronic pain and opioid prescribing. I want to thank him for attending the meeting and providing the presentation. Dr. Henry, thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. So I'm presenting here today just some brief highlights from a statewide survey of physicians and pharmacists that we conducted, a group at UC Davis conducted in collaboration with the California Department of Public Health and with coordination and a lot of help from the medical board, State Board of Pharmacy, and the OMBC also. The full report is in the documents. So I just wanted to for this presentation to give a very brief summary of the Cures 2.0 implementation, summarize the results from the survey that we conducted with a focus on the physician responses, and discuss briefly potential implications for the mandatory Cures use law SB 482 that will eventually be implemented. So this is a reminder, this is a simplified timeline of Cures. Cures is the state-controlled substance utilization review evaluation system. The current version of Cures was launched after SB 809 required some updates. That was launched, I think, in 2015, 2016. And a mandatory Cures registration took place in July 2016. While we conducted this survey in order to elicit feedback on Cures 2.0 and the improvements to the Cures system, and to provide information to the Department of Justice for improving Cures, and also provide information to Cures users and stakeholders like medical board, DCA, physicians and pharmacists. And we wanted to also characterize Cures usage patterns and effects on prescribing potentially. So just to say, this survey took place, started a couple of months after mandatory registration took effect in the fall of 2016. It was a quasi-random sample of physicians and pharmacists based on the licensee birth month. And we had a lot of help from this board as well as the other boards in coordinating that. And without the help, this survey would definitely not have been possible. This slide shows briefly the response rate. The response rate was about 22% for physicians, osteopathic and allopathic. And this was a pretty good response rate given that it was a web-only survey. In the response, we asked 82% of the physicians noted that they were registered for Cures, and pharmacists did a little bit better. This is a separate data that we obtained from the Department of Justice that tracks registration, our estimate of Cures registration compliance. The orange is the pharmacists, and the blue lines are all physicians and are all prescribers. So you can see prescribers overall is about 65% or so. Among physicians who reported that they were not registered for Cures, we asked them why they weren't registered. The most commonly endorsed response was that they don't know how to register, and that they have other problems that are more important than registering for Cures. We asked them what they thought about Cures, how helpful it was. 60% of physicians thought Cures was helpful, agreed or strongly disagreed. not so many agreed that it was easy to use. There was a good percentage who felt cures was not relevant to their practice. Some proportion of these were retired physicians who still had active licenses, or physicians who practiced mostly out of state, or physicians who had a DEA license but generally did not prescribe controlled substances. We asked them how likely they were. They thought they would be to use cures at least once in the next 3 months. You can see there's a wide range of responses. We asked them to compare the old version of cures to the new version of cures. Most people said that it was about the same, or a good percentage said that that the new system was better. Very few people said the new system was worse. 6% said the help desk support was worse. I don't know how that's possible, since the old cures didn't have a help desk. But this information we gathered and gave it to the Department of Justice to help them. We did find some areas for improvement. As you can see from this slide, a majority of the physician respondents had never heard about several of the advanced features of the Cures 2.0 system. So the ability to send messages to other prescribers through Cures, the ability to use delegates, the ability to flag patients who have patient-provider controlled substance agreements on file. So very, very less than 5% of the physician respondents had ever even used any of these. So that's definitely an area for improvement. We asked them, when they checked Cures, what percent of the time did the information that you received alter your prescribing decision? You can see most people said 0, 10, or 20% of the time. But this suggests to us that there is a significant minority of the time when checking Cures does affect prescribing decisions for physicians. We asked physicians, should physicians check Cures prior to writing a controlled substance prescription? And as you can see, there was overwhelming support for that. When we asked them, should physicians be required to check Cures prior to writing a controlled substance, as you can see, the numbers reversed. We did the requirement for mandatory checking of Cures was signed by the governor during this survey process, and actually we found that people who filled out the survey after that new law was signed actually were more likely to agree that physicians should be required to check Cures. So we thought there might be a backlash, but there was, if anything, there was no backlash. We asked them whether they thought checking Cures was standard of care. About 38% said they strongly agreed. Just as reference, the pharmacists said were about 60% and thinking it was standard of care. This is a very busy slide that summarizes some statistical analysis by some researchers at Department of Public Health. I'll just say the general findings from this paper, which should be published soon, was that they wanted to see what predicted physicians' desire or intent to use Cures in the future. And the two things that predicted it the most were whether they thought Cures was useful and whether they thought their colleagues and peers checked Cures on a regular basis. So whether they thought there was a moral obligation or a professional obligation to check Cures did not impact. So I thought that was interesting. So just briefly, these are our thoughts and implications. Obviously, people can draw their own conclusions from the report. The efforts to increase Cures use would be effective if they focus on making Cures more useful and promoting Cures as normative among physicians. So everyone does it. Everyone does it. It's the routine, expected type of thing. Obviously, we think the mandatory use law is going to increase Cures use among physicians. And I just want to say at the end that this survey was a lot of fun to do, and it was a great example of really good coordination between the medical boards, DCA, pharmacy board, public health, Department of Justice, and so that kind of coordination, I think, is very productive. Hopefully that this information will be useful to the board. And this is just acknowledgments of the funding and the thanks. And you can, people in the audience or board members, of course, can send me emails with questions.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. Any comments, questions from the board? Yeah, Dr. Hawkins.
Thank you very much for providing this. I just want to say, as a practicing physician who uses cures, I found it to be very, very helpful.
Yeah, just I'm still curious who are these 8% of people who do not know. I mean, that's the one which amazed me. There are people who adamantly believe that it doesn't do anything to them. But more often what I hear is the time it takes to get, so that's where the biggest problem is, the time commitment. And usually my answer has been with them to them is, let your office check, but the report comes to you. So that's another one. People complain that the report comes to them and they're already piled up in paperwork to the extreme, and then they have to go find this. So that's this. There are some issues, but in the end, with the opioid epidemic, there is no doubt it is extremely useful. Any comments from the audience?
Just one more.
Yes, Dr. Hawkins.
I just want to say that, like so many other things, the more you use it, the easier it is to use. But also, Cures 2.0 has some shortcuts that actually are very, very helpful.
Yes, I agree. There's a significant issue with IT integration. I know I don't work for DOJ, but I know that they're working hard to try to make it easier with AB 40 to integrate cures into the medical record. But it seems like it's a long, slow process.
So another question coming here is that how did you find out whether somebody has DEA or not?
Well, that's a public information.
Okay.
We didn't. We asked them in the survey whether they had a DEA for the survey. So about 9% of physicians said they didn't have a DEA license, and then if they said they didn't have a DEA license, they ended the survey. So after the first couple of questions, if you didn't have a DEA license, you didn't continue the survey.
Okay. Great, thank you. Any comments from the audience? Comments on the phone?
No comments from the phone.
Thank you, Doctor. Oh, Ron, you got one more. Okay.
This way we're hidden. Did you mention, and I may have missed it, when you take this study and you go a little bit further, that you think that it might, sorry, I guess I don't know how to use this microphone. Do you think this might affect the opioid addiction problem, or do you think this is, there are other tools that are actually going to be proved to be better than this?
Well,
I've heard different opinions.
Yes, just as my opinion as a primary care physician and somebody who thinks about this, I think Cures is definitely a tool, and I view it as a tool. So it's another piece of information that's very, very helpful. It's not an end-all, be-all, but it kind of depends, also your practice pattern. So emergency medicine physicians view it as a much more, watching out for pharmacy shopping, catching bad guys type of thing. I think in primary care, my perspective, it's a very important tool and an essential tool for prescribing long-term opioids, but it's not a panacea.
Right. I think the better tool, in my opinion, is patient education, doctor education, overprescribing, left behind opioids, those things. This is just a tool, but it's not going to be the answer, and I hope people don't think that this is the be-all, end-all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Henry. Okay, now moving to agenda item 9, update on the Physician Assistant Board from Ms. Forsyth, who is the Executive Officer of the PA Board. Ms. Forsyth.
I got it. First of all, I'm going to keep my remarks extremely short in the essence of time because I know you have a rather large agenda still. First of all, I would like to say that at our October board meeting, Mr. Robert Sachs was elected board president and Mr. Jed Grant was elected vice president for this year. They are both practicing PAs in Sacramento or in California, and they have invaluable knowledge that we utilize constantly. Secondly, for our new PA applicants for licensure, we are currently averaging issuing licenses between 20 to 30 per week. When the PA schools are graduating, it can be as high as 50 per week. We currently have a little over 11,000 licensed PAs in California, and we are expecting 5 new PA schools to come on board in the next few years, so our licensees will increase. Thirdly, we recently completed an internal audit with the Department of Consumer Affairs Audit Division. They spent approximately 3 to 4 months in our office going over every procedure, process, everything that we do on a daily basis, from licensing to enforcement to internal procedures. I would like to thank Ms. Kirchmeyer and her staff. They were instrumental in helping us with part of the audit for our enforcement, which was a great assist. And I hope to have that report available within the next couple of months to be able to share with everybody. And lastly, we are working on a number of regulations related to the PA practice, one of which we will be discussing shortly. We are also in the process of seeking legislation to assist us with the possible fee increase for our initial application. We currently only charge $25. So we're to the point now we've done a fee assessment and we realize it's costing us a little bit more. So, and that's the end of my remarks. Yes. They're going through the accreditation process right now. So a couple of them are open. Keck is open, and I believe there's another in Southern California open.
Any other comments from the board? Dr. Yip.
To the medical school administrator, as far as strengthening the teaching of the medical student and resident, as far as like substance abuse and medical ethics, professionalism, etc., how to prevent them from getting into like violation DUI. Is there such a strong emphasis in the training of the PAs? Because in public eye, a lot of PA being looked at just like doctors.
It's up to the various schools what curriculum that they provide. In the office, we are extremely concerned with ethics and how they're presented, how they present themselves. So that's an issue that we are going to be looking at.
Any other comments from the board? Any comments from the audience? Comments on the phone?
No comments from the phone.
Okay, thank you. Now moving to the agenda item 10, discussion on possible action on amending the Title 16 California Code of Regulations section 1399.545 supervision required for physician assistants. Ms. Forsyth, please continue.
Okay. As a background on this one, Business and Professions Code section 3502 and 3502.1 were amended with the implementation of Senate Bill 337. This bill required medical records to reflect the supervising physician for each episode of care, require a physician assistant who transmits an oral order to identify the supervising physician, recast medical record review provisions to require the supervising physician to utilize one or more mechanisms, and to recast prescribing provisions to allow how a physician assistant documents Schedule II controlled substances. Due to the amendments to 3502 and 3502.1 of the California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1399.545, changes must be made to this section. We would ask the board, I believe you have the amended language in your packets, and I hope you've had an opportunity to look at it. We would ask the board to approve the proposed amendments to this section and authorize staff to proceed through the rulemaking process.
Thank you. Any comments, Kim?
So we have a unique situation with the physician assistant board. Anytime they're looking at regulations regarding physician supervision or scope of practice, the way the law is written, those actually will go through the medical board and not through the physician assistant board. And so when they have regulations, they've already approved them at their board meeting, and so they bring them to us, and then we're going to be the ones carrying them through the process. So as Ms. Forsyth said, this truly is basically implementing legislation and bringing the current regulations in line with what the changes happened through 337. So that's really what this is happening, and that's why it's coming to you. It's a little unique, so we will need a motion to start that process and get it going. And you know, Ms. Forsyth's staff will be doing the work with it with our attorney and their attorney, but it really will be the medical board carrying it.
So can I have a motion to approve the proposed amendments to 16 CCR section 1399.545 to authorize staff to proceed through the rulemaking process to notice the modified language for a 45-day comment period and hearing upon DCA and agency approval, and to authorize staff to make any non-substantial changes to the proposed language during the rulemaking process.
Second.
Why, reading that is longer than making a motion. Okay, keep trying, Howard. Is there, Ms. Webb, is there any highlights you want to highlight in the rules, or?
I think just as what Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Kirkmeyer presented, it's to bring the regulation into compliance with the new legislation under 3502 and 3502.1 in the Business and Professions Code. So luckily this is a pretty straightforward regulation.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from the board? Comments from the audience? Yes, ma'am. Come on in.
Sorry.
Oh, we have a slip. Oh,
Sorry.
let me recognize you, Lynn Andrus.
Yes. Hello, my name is Lynn Andres, and I'm the Director of Government Relations for the California Academy of PAs. CAPA would like to express its thanks to the staff of the Medical Board and the PA Board for their work, and we're happy to report that we are supportive of the proposed language. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Comments on the phone?
No comments on the phone.
Okay. Ms. Cruz-Jones, the roll call, please.
Dr. Bolat?
Aye.
Dr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Kraus?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Aye, and I have to make an aye for Agenda 3 because I said present. So officially, Agenda 3 is an aye also. Thank you.
We got that anyway, so go ahead.
Ms. Pines?
Aye.
Mr. Wormuth?
Aye.
Ms. Wright?
Aye.
Dr. Yip?
Aye.
And Dr. Granadav?
Aye. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Foss.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving to agenda item 11, discussion and possible action on legislation regulations. Ms. Simos. Now we are in turbo speed, Jennifer. Go.
All right. Okay, so you should have received some handouts, including a legislative calendar, and there are copies on the back table. The 2018 legislative session has started, and the bill introduction deadline is not until February 16th, so we will have many more bills at our next board meeting. In your legislative packets is your tracker list. On your tracker list, the 2-year bills are in blue, and these do not need to be discussed today, as they have not been moved or been amended since we last took positions. There are 4 bills in green that we will need to discuss and take a position on today. Before we discuss the bills, I would first like to provide you an update on the legislative proposals that were approved at our last board meeting. We have approached Assemblymember Arambula's office for the UCLA International Medical Graduate Program proposal, and he has approved, and he will be the author of the bill that we are co-sponsoring with the UC Office of the President. The bill has not yet been introduced. We also have 3 omnibus proposals that we have submitted to Senate Business and Professions Committee for inclusion in the committee's omnibus bill. We've met with staff and the proposals are going through the review process. Lastly, I would like to provide an update regarding the 2018 Legislative Day. I'll be working with Dr. Ganadev and Ms. Pines on a time frame for the next Legislative Day, and we're looking at the end of February or early March. Once we have decided on a date or some dates, I'll be reaching out to all board members to see if you are interested in participating. Then I will send out a doodle poll to interested members to try to set up the Legislative Day on the day that works best for everyone. More details will follow, but it will be similar to the last Legislative Day, where members will meet with legislators that sit on the relevant policy committees to talk about board issues. So now I'd like to move on to the first bill in green, which is AB 820 Gibson. This bill was amended on January 3rd, 2018, and although this bill did not meet the deadline and is no longer moving, the exact language from this bill was moved into a new bill. So we won't necessarily be discussing the bill and taking a position on the bill, but it's the language that's included in the bill. So I'm going to start in on the language. So the language would include in the definition of advanced life support, which an EMT paramedic is authorized to provide, determining transport at the scene of an emergency to a community care facility or an acute care hospital. If transport to a community care facility is determined, the approved local EMS plan must be followed. The language would define a community care facility as a mental health urgent care center or sobering center, which is staffed with medical personnel designated by a local EMS agency as a part of an approved local EMS plan. The language would allow a local EMS agency to submit, as part of its EMS plan, a plan to transport patients to a community care facility that is not a general acute care hospital, based on a determination by an EMT paramedic that there is no need for emergency health care. This language has certain requirements that what the plan must include. I can go over those requirements. They're in your analysis as well. Do you want me to go over the requirements for the EMS plan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so it has to include criteria for designating a facility as a community care facility, including appropriate medical staffing and administrative medical oversight, such as a medical director. Has to include one or more policies for prompt evaluation and treatment of patients within a facility. Must include a communication plan between pre-hospital medical personnel. Must include a secondary transport to include criteria for contacting the jurisdictional pre-hospital provider for transport to emergency department of a general acute care hospital. Must include medical equipment and monitoring protocols. Required submission of a quality improvement plan and patient outcome data to the local EMS agency. It must include additional education requirement for paramedics and protocols for handling patient destination considerations, including requests by patients. This language would require the Emergency Medical Services Authority to authorize a local EMS agency to add to its scope of practice for an EMT paramedic those activities necessary for the assessment, treatment, and transport of a patient to a community care facility upon approval of the EMS plan to transport patient to a community care facility. So board staff consulted with a physician board member and provided input to OSHPD on HWPP pilot project number 173 back in 2014. This language would authorize one of the original 6 concepts allowed for in the pilot project. At that time in 2014, one of the concerns raised by the medical board was related to transport of a patient to an alternate location other than a general acute care hospital emergency department. At that time, the board was concerned that transport of a patient to an alternate location other than emergency department carried the risk of a patient being transported to a facility that is not appropriate to meet the patient's needs, especially in cases where presenting signs and symptoms of life-threatening illnesses may be subtle. In such cases, the board stated in its letter that failure to have transported that patient to an emergency department may jeopardize the patient's well-being and survival. Board staff reviewed this bill, and we think that this concern may still be relevant to this bill. So board staff is recommending that the board take an opposed position on this bill.
Comments? Yeah, Dr. Kraus.
I think if the bill's language is appropriately restrictive, that we need to reconsider that. There may be a concern about a community care facility, but if this bill will carefully restrict to acute mental health care facilities or sobering centers, and if we can be certain of the accreditation of those centers, I think this may be a good thing. I can recall when I was an intern taking care of an acute psychiatric patient, that our only opportunity to see that that patient got proper care was to try to transfer them to the psychiatric hospital in Norwalk, most of the time there was no capacity there. Over the last few decades, I think that things have changed. I think that there are a plethora of well-functioning, highly trained mental health acute care centers. There are a growing group of sobering centers. And if we trust a proper triage and decision to be made, number one, it may be a better service to the patient to go directly to a sobering center or a mental health care clinic than to go to the ER and not be seen promptly. In addition to which, we've seen with the flu epidemic how easily dysfunctional ERs become when they're overcrowded. And if patients can be better served elsewhere, this could ease an overcrowding situation in emergency rooms so that more patients could get proper care quickly. But before I would fully endorse it, I think I would like to learn more about what currently exists in the way of acute mental health care centers and sobering centers. So perhaps we'll take a position on this bill today. I don't think I would be in outright opposition. I'd like to work with the author of it. But I'd also like to inquire if at the next board meeting we might have someone from a acute mental health care clinic and from a sobering center educate us as to what occurs there. And I would assume at those centers that when patients arrive there, they're screened for other acute medical conditions, that drunk patients who may need to be treated to prevent delirium tremens and Wernicke's encephalopathy are properly screened for that. So in fact, if the language of the bill is adequately restrictive, this may be better for Californians than what we have right now.
And I believe there's some that support this bill and some that oppose this bill that want to speak today as well.
Yeah, I think I actually are somewhat leaning in the way of Dr. Krause's comments, except that I do want to make sure that there are enough amendments. They do get approval from the base stations or whoever are the base station physicians, so that there is a physician supervision rather than just a paramedic making a decision and then it is just a scope and consumer safety. So that's where my concern is. So I'm leaning towards neutral if amended, because we don't have all the information and all the amendments, rather than oppose. So that's the way right now my thinking is. So I want to hear everybody too. So.
And in the requirements for the EMS plan, it does require the local EMS agency to have criteria for designated facility as a community care facility. It has to include appropriate medical staffing and administrative medical oversight. So they will work on that when they're they work on their plan, and that plan has to be approved. So,
and it is already limited in the language that community care facility means those two centers.
Dr. Lewis. I think what you're hearing is that we don't know enough. On your mic.
There. I think what we're hearing is that we don't know enough about outcomes when we transfer individuals, patients to these facilities. There's so many subtleties that manifest themselves or mimic mental health conditions. I mean, toxoplasmosis, electrolyte imbalances, everything that the base station doctor and the paramedic are not going to know about. And sometimes time is of the essence. So if there are enough restrictions, and there's a good communication between the base station doctor and the paramedic, maybe we could proceed along with this. But we do need to hear, I think I need to hear from people who have done the research, and I need some information back in the next board meeting. Can we take neutral? Is a neutral position acceptable? Well, you have opposed. I rather be leaning more to
we can definitely
neutral.
take neutral. Like I said, my oppose was based on our position that we took in 2014, so it was a little bit different then.
I would be more comfortable with a neutral until we get the information back.
There is actually a report that's out on the pilot project. It's a little bit different than exactly what's included in this bill.
That's going to go away.
Well, yeah, but it does have some statistics on that pilot and those concepts, so I can get
So-
that out to the board
I
members.
think we need to hear those statistics, yes.
Any other comments from the board? Yes, Dr. Kraus.
One other short comment I want to add is we already trust our paramedics to be making clinical decisions. We trust them to determine whether or not someone may be having symptoms of a stroke. So they transport them to a stroke center rather than to the nearest emergency room. So I think if we're restrictive in the guidelines of who will be transported to an alternative center and we're comfortable with the quality of medical screening at those centers, that it could turn out to be a good thing.
Well, as a trauma surgeon, I do have some concerns about safety issues, so that's why I want to make sure that the base station physician is involved, and there are certain they need to follow. That's why opposition. I think I'm with people who spoke before that we can take a pose off, but we need to know a lot more details. And the main reason is the patient safety. I mean, that's about it. I totally get it. One of the hospital I am at, chief of surgery, has the second busiest emergency room in the state of California. It's just 350 to 400 patients come there every day. It just at the flu season it gets worse. So it's become so difficult to take care of real problems compared to medication refill, or then they have to be evaluated, then sent to mental health facility right next door. So there are issues. I think it has a good point. Maybe that's the reason hospital association is behind it. But we need to make sure that consumer safety is protected. Okay, so if there are, do we have a motion of any kind? I can get the audience comments before we have a motion if you want. Yeah, that's what I thought you might want to. So let's, because this is an issue where a lot of people want to talk, so let's let's take audience comments. The first one is BJ Bartleson, California Hospital Association.
Thank you. And just to let you know, there's a couple of physicians on the phone too that will be able to offer you some of the answers that you've asked for. Thank you very much for letting us be here to talk about AB 1795. CHA, along with the medical board, is very concerned about quality, safe patient care for the citizens of California. And we have been working very closely for the past 4 years with EMSA, OSHPOD, and the local EMS agencies, the Emergency State Authority that is working with OSHPOD and the community paramedicine alternate destination pilots, because, as you well know, our emergency care system is in a state of peril. And it's interesting that while we have become the most dependable resource for rapid point of care response, we are now caring for not only emergent patients, but non-urgent patients, urgent patients, and now we're curing social ills, behavioral health, social inebriation, substance abuse, and you name it. And we cannot withstand that demand. Our emergency departments are at a breaking point, particularly in metropolitan areas. We are seeing over 1 million more visits a year in our emergency departments, and we cannot contain that kind of demand. We have severe increase in diversion hours, left without being seen, and ambulance patient offload delays, which really restricts quality patient care inside of our EDs and outside to get those ambulances back out in the street to take care of patients that are emergently sick. Again, we've been working closely to try to innovate and transform the way our emergency systems work. And again, we have 3 physicians on the phone. One is Dr. Kevin Mackey, who is from the Stanislaus Behavioral Health Alternate Destination Pilot Project, and hopefully he can give you some answers to your research questions. And Dr. Clement Yee, who is from San Francisco Sobering Center, and he will give you some of his research results. And we strongly ask for your support on AB 1795, and we will come and provide you any information that you need. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, just to clarify, 820, 1795. Can you tell us the
So
difference?
AB 1795 includes the exact same language that AB 820 did in the version that you have on your packets. It's just a new bill number because the other bill died.
I just want to make sure that if there is same language, then it can be same. We can take both items. Okay. Next one is Tim Madden, California Chapter of Emergency. American Colleges of Emergency Physicians. Dr. Madden.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate your time. Our organization has been involved in the discussion around the pilot programs for going on 3 years now. And when we look specifically at the language that's in your board packet, our organization has taken a opposed unless amended position. And the reason for that, and the reason why we've been so engaged in the conversation, is that we share the concerns as outlined by Ms. Simoes in terms of the patient safety. And we worry that what may happen if a paramedic doesn't necessarily catch one of the acute situations that Dr. Krause is talking about, and they end up getting transferred to a behavioral health center or to a sobering center, and those facilities are just not equipped to handle those types of emergencies. So that time that is spent at those facilities is something that will be working to the detriment of the patient. With that being said, we think the pilot projects are a good idea to test these theories out, and if they are found to be able to be done safely, then as an organization, we want to be open to that. So we share the concerns from Ms. Bartleson and the Hospital Association that the emergency care system is under some significant pressure. But with that being said, we don't think we should be coming up with programs that reroute patients who do have an underlying emergency that needs to be addressed in the emergency department. So once again, specifically looking at the language that's in your board packet, which the board is considering taking a position, we do have a number of concerns. One of which this bill would greatly expand the scope of practice for paramedics. It specifically states in the language that from today, the paramedic's role is to assess the patient and then transport them to the hospital as it stands right now. But there is language in the bill that says they now would be treating the patient. So if the question is whether or not they should be going to a sobering center or to a behavioral health center, this bill goes beyond that by specifically stating that they're now in a position where they be treating the patient, and that's not further defined within the legislation. One of the other challenges is when it comes to the facility types. So the bill is limited to behavioral health centers and to sobering centers. The challenge there, specifically with sobering centers, is that there is no facility type defined or regulated in California that's a sobering center. So similar to an outpatient surgery center, which is subject to accreditation requirements that you're very familiar with, there is no similar structure for a sobering center. There is some language talking about the local EMS might come up with some regulations as it relates to it, but that's a far cry from the accreditation process, which I know this board is very familiar with. So that would need to be defined within the legislation, which is a huge undertaking. One of the other challenges is if the basis of the bill is saying that these two pilot programs are successful, the question then becomes is how do you replicate that under a bill to make sure that whatever another EMS agency does is the same as those successful programs? What about those programs, those pilot projects have been successful?
Please conclude.
How do we get that into legislation? So those are just a few of the challenges we have, and we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Madden. I'm sure, Ms. Simoes, you heard us too on those issues, especially the first two Dr. Madden talked about, that is the assessment and then treatment. So that's why I want to make sure that the base station physician is involved. So there are a lot of amendments which need to be in the bill before we take anything other than oppose. So that's why I want to make sure that we heard that. So. Okay, next one is Ken Miller, Dr. Miller.
Hi there, I'm Ken Miller, and I'm the medical director for the Santa Clara County Emergency Medical Services Agency, where you are, and also the principal investigator for the Santa Clara County EMS Mental Health and Sobering Center Alternate Destinations Pilot Project. This is one of those OSPD HWPP number 173 projects that is going on right now. you've heard a bit already, so I'll just summarize. AB 820, as you have in your agenda, was replaced by AB 1795, which amends the section 1797 of the Health and Safety Code to define, as you heard, the community care facilities as mental health, urgent care, and sobriety centers, which is a narrower scope than prior legislation. Took on for community paramedicine and for mobile integrated health. It also authorizes medical directors of local EMS agencies like myself to include in their EMS plans paramedic scope of practice and transport destination policies to include these community care facilities. Issues that have been raised regarding community paramedicine and mobile integrated healthcare in California include local EMS medical director determination of patient transportation destinations, as well as patient safety. Regarding the EMS system determination of patient transportation destinations, it's been an evidence-based practice for more than 30 years for trauma, and more recently for ST elevation, myocardial infarction, for stroke, for burns, for cardiopulmonary resuscitation with return of spontaneous circulation, and for obstetrics. Regarding patient safety, the healthcare workforce pilot projects have medical directors that are board certified in emergency medicine and have quality assurance officers. The community paramedics have real-time access to physicians and registered nurses for consultation. Electronic pre-hospital patient care record systems can provide real-time notification of project investigators and managers when patients are enrolled in the study and provide data monitoring, trending, and analysis on a patient-by-patient basis. Evidence-based inclusion and exclusion criteria are part of these institutional review board approved pilot projects. Each pilot project has a local steering committee, which include both subject matter experts, EMS, and healthcare stakeholders, and a member of the public who's not affiliated with the project. At the state level, there's a statewide steering committee that reviews data quarterly, and independent evaluator that reviews pilot site data. Pilot site protocols are reviewed by the California EMS Authority and by OSHPD, and unusual occurrences are reported to the EMS Authority's pilot project manager. Our project would be transporting patients to a currently licensed emergency psychiatric facility and to a medically supervised sobriety center. Behavioral crisis, psychiatric disorders, and substance use disorders are common among 911 EMS patient encounters. There's a need for enabling legislation to further advance the practice of community paramedicine and mobile integrated healthcare in California.
Please conclude.
These programs have the potential to increase access to specific healthcare needs of patients and to provide means to evaluate efficiencies and economies of healthcare that's more customized to the individual patient through pre-hospital care systems. So thank you, and I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Miller.
Sure.
At least this board member is well aware of the state EMS agency because I was one of the commissioners before, so thank you though. Next one is Clayton Kazar, I think. Los Angeles County Fire Department, Mr. Kazar.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the time. I appreciate getting to come up here voluntarily, versus the medical board has always been this ominous thing that I have not yet come to visit. So my name is Clayton Kazan. I've been a practicing emergency physician in South LA for the past 12 years, and I'm the current full-time medical director for the LA County Fire Department. LA County Fire, we see about 1,000 patients a day, which makes us as busy or busier than any emergency department in the state. We're in a crisis. Our ED systems are absolutely unsustainable. I'm also a member of CalACEP. I have been for many years. But it seems that people are unwilling to accept the fact that our system functions at or near capacity on a regular basis. And as much as we talk about the flu epidemic being such a terrible thing, the flu epidemic is entirely predictable. It's annual. And while some years may be a little bit worse than others, this is an entirely predictable phenomenon, and yet it completely overwhelms our department. So I've reviewed the board's legislative analysis for AB 820 or 1795. Nowhere in the analysis does it say that the paramedics that are out in the field are practicing under the supervision of their medical director, which is me, and that I practice under the regulatory supervision of another EMS physician, which is Dr. Gaucher-Hill, who's on the phone, or that we all practice under the state EMS medical director as well. So these paramedics are not out in the field operating independently. They're trained to operate within a system of care that we establish as EMS physicians. We have robust quality improvement programs. We perform research. We utilize evidence-based practice, and we perform best practice. We train our paramedics to do triage every day, like Ken was saying, and as with you, Dr. Gananadev, for our trauma system is a great example. We established a system by which our paramedics can assess and treat trauma patients in the field, transport them to an appropriate center, and we've also developed a safety net system so when patients are under triaged and they go to a non-trauma center, we have a system to rescue those patients and bring them back into the trauma system. There is no reason to think that we would not develop a similar system for mental health patients or patients that are needing sobering centers. And the last thing I'd like to say is those that are opposing the bill have no suggestions. Maintaining the status quo is really unacceptable. What we're doing is we're leaving these patients to languish on the ambulance walls, spending hours. We had a psych patient in my ER spend 11 days in our emergency department. We have ambulance patients that are intoxicated that spend hours on the wall, and we're trained that as soon as they're sober enough to safely leave, but not so sober that they're in withdrawal, we discharge them. Can anyone argue that what we're doing currently is in the best interest of our patients, or that patients that are going through the ER system, which is the biggest choke point in acute care, are getting better outcomes as a result of it? And I'll conclude and answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kazan. We appreciate your pain. I was the chief of trauma before. I'm the chair of surgery now. I know what happens in the ER. So next one is Megan Allred from California Medical Association.
Hi, thank you. Megan Allred with the California Medical Association. I don't want to belabor all of the points that were made by the emergency physicians or what were spelled out really well in the analysis, but we also would like to maintain and would support maintaining an opposed position on this bill because there are a lot of safety concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Comments on the phone before we take a motion?
Yes, we do have comments on the phone. Our first one's from Clement Ye. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, members of the medical board. My name is Clement Ye, and first off, I just wanted to say thank you for your hard work on this issue. Obviously, there's a lot of passionate opinions, and I think that the members of the board hit a lot of the key issues that everyone is thinking about, and I applaud that. I'm an emergency physician at San Francisco General Hospital, as well as UCSF faculty, and I serve as medical director for the fire department. And again, I don't want to belabor some of the many points that were made already, but I wanted to share a little bit of information about our experience with the San Francisco Sobering Center, and I also would absolutely like to take the board's offer up if they require some more information about our exact practices and how we have attempted to address concerns about safety and effectiveness. So the Sobering Center has been in operation since 2003 and actually cared for over 10,000 unique individuals in more than 44,000 encounters. And as was mentioned before, the model for this is very similar to the concept of STEMI centers, trauma centers, and other focused specialty care centers. The paramedics do a thorough evaluation and have a checklist protocol to determine if a client is appropriate to be transported to a sobering center. And there's a nurse on duty 24 hours a day who performs intake and serial assessments. The actual rate of clients who need secondary transport to an emergency department for further care is very low, around 4%. And the center, most importantly, the center is staffed with social workers and provides case management, and actually is the top referral source for the city's medical detox service. So I really would argue that this is an enhancement upon the standard care that we attempt to do in a system that is not really geared for dealing with chronic behavioral health disorders or substance abuse. So again, there has been a lot of data collected and reported, and happy to share at the board's pleasure. And the positive effects of the program have actually been published in many peer-reviewed journals. But beyond the data, it just simply improved the lives of many people. And I applaud the board's interest and diligence about this. We found the Sobering Center has been a very important resource for the care of vulnerable people in our city, and I strongly encourage the medical board to support improved access to community care facilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments on the phone?
Yes, we have another comment from Saskia Kim. Go ahead. Thank you. This is Saskia Kim with the California Nurses Association. Thank you for the opportunity to comment about AB 1795. CNA opposes AB 1795 as well as AB 820 because they both threaten patient safety by authorizing the use of paramedics to provide healthcare services that are currently provided by physicians, registered nurses, and social workers. And as you know, and it's been talked about, there are pilot projects that allow paramedics to provide care that's not currently authorized by law. And as part of the projects, paramedics are undertaking care currently performed by physicians, RNs, and social workers with limited additional training, not nearly enough for them to acquire the level of expertise and skill needed to ensure patient safety. So, for example, in the case of the Sobering Center pilot, alternate destination paramedics received only 8 additional hours of training. And importantly, the patient population that's been enrolled in the pilot projects does not reflect California's diverse population. With the exception of 2 projects, the first-year data show that the overwhelming majority of people enrolled in those pilot projects were disproportionately English-speaking white males. In addition, during the review of the pilot projects, most of the data collection has focused on cost savings and not patient outcomes. And we believe the end result will be cost savings for hospitals and health insurers and a lower standard of care for the most vulnerable people in our society. So, for example, a hypothermic patient was refused admission to the Sobering Center pilot site because, surprisingly, it was not part of the protocol in the field for the alternate destination paramedics to do routine body temperature measurements. And this is a standard of care for all registered nurses, and it's especially concerning that it was missing from the Sobering Center protocol, given that hypothermia is common in chronic alcoholics. Furthermore, there's no tracking of the number of patients brought to the Sobering Center pilot site but refused admission by the center's staff. And those numbers, we believe, are important because they could be an indication that the paramedic made the wrong call out in the field in deciding to divert a patient to the Sobering Center rather than bringing the patient directly to the ED. Finally, reference has been made to the UCSF evaluation of the pilot, and I just want to mention quickly that CNA has completed its own review of the data used by the Health Force Center at UCSF, and we found the evaluation incomplete and inaccurate in a number of ways. So, for example, there was actually an increase in the rate of rehospitalizations for the largest group of patients enrolled in the post-discharge congestive heart failure pilot project. And in addition, none of the costs associated with ED visits were actually included in the financial analysis, so there were a significant number of patients enrolled in the pilot project who returned to the ED after discharge from the hospital. And I'm happy to share our review of the UCSF evaluation with the board. It's one we prepared for OSHPOD, so happy to send that to you as well. And in sum, CNA opposes the bills because we believe that they would expand paramedic scope of practice and increase industry profits at the expense of public safety and public health. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, we have another comment. Lauren Stock, go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm speaking on behalf of the Board of Directors of California ACEP, representing emergency physicians throughout California. This bill is about expanding the scope of practice for paramedics in California. The population that's being looked at, the population that calls 911, is not a low-risk population. When you look at the subsets of patients with behavioral health problems and alcoholism, these patients have multiple other medical problems, housing challenges, and other issues. So they're a complex group of patients. So we have to ask ourselves a couple questions, because I do, and our organization does believe this revolves around patient safety. The first is, where's the evidence that a community paramedic can make the key decisions, sick or not sick, meaning, do I take the patient to the hospital or not? There is evidence in the literature that supports that up to 20% of patients are under triage, meaning a paramedic in a study felt that the patient wasn't sick enough to go to the hospital, and they actually were. In our current system, the patient is never heard of a paramedic under triage, so because they at least go to the hospital where there's a emergency physician and an emergency care team, or they go to a higher level of care. So equating going to a sobering center or a behavioral health center, which does not necessarily have a physician on site for any part of the patient's visit, is not the same. In my eyes, it's a lower level of care. So going to an ER or to a STEMI center, going to a pediatric ER, going to a stroke center, a trauma center, all higher levels of care. But at least going to an emergency physician at an emergency room gives you a level of care that you people are licensing and regulating, and you understand what that is. The second is that there is also evidence there's a great overlap when you look at chief complaints of patients between between emergent and non-emergent eventual diagnoses, and that's been well documented. So trying to decide based on a complaint, is a patient sick or not sick, is not very helpful. What we really need is a prospective validated triage tool, and if that existed, then that would be a very useful tool for a paramedic to use to decide, does the patient need to go to the hospital, or could they go to a lower level care specialty center? Our group has met with Dr. Mackey. I believe he is working hard on that, and we are looking for opportunities to collaborate, but I believe this is still at a opportunity where he's trying to, on his side on behavioral health, trying to determine best practices, and when those are determined, trying to replicate those, as Mr. Madden said, throughout California, rather than leaving it up to each LEMSA to do their own thing, would be the proper language to use. We also met in LA County with Dr. Gaucher Hill and Dr. Kazan and Dr. Katz, trying to look for opportunities to collaborate as well. So our organization has taken an opposed unless amended position. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments on the phone?
Yes, we have another one from Marianne Gauche Hill. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hi, my name is Dr. Marianne Gauche Hill. Currently I'm the medical director for Los Angeles County EMS, which has practically in LA County 1 in 25 paramedics in the United States, over 4,000 paramedics. We have 32 ALS provider agencies, all of which have medical directors who do oversight, including quality improvement. Currently, paramedics are involved in a triage of a large number of medical complaints and are subject to multiple levels of quality review. Plus, the proposed bill requires policies and procedures in place to not only evaluate these patients in the field, but also to re-triage these patients at sobering centers, which includes evaluation by nurses and oversight by a medical director. In regards to the transport of patients to sobering centers in San Francisco, as was mentioned, 44,000 patients, of which 15,000 were transported by EMS. I reviewed, with the help of the data that Shannon Smith-Bernardin, who was the director at that time, all of the data about transports back to the emergency department. The large majority of those were based on reassessment of the sobering center, and if the vital signs fell in a very conservative range outside normal, these patients were transported back. There is no data that the transport back resulted in any additional improved outcome for the patients. In addition, Dr. Shannon Smith-Bernardin also has data which demonstrates the 40% cost reduction of sobering at sobering centers versus the emergency department. And finally, patients with psychiatric complaints without signs of acute medical emergency, as was mentioned by others, may wait days to weeks before getting appropriate evaluation. I'm an emergency physician. I work at a county hospital in Los Angeles, and I've been involved in a significant out-of-hospital research project. The 13 paramedicine programs that have been implemented in the state have been IRB approved and have had a considerable medical oversight. To request additional research in this area, I think is important, as with all issues in medicine. However, I feel that should not inhibit moving forward for these particular patients who are more likely to get the care that they need at either a sobering center or a mental health urgent care. Often in the ED, after the patient is medically cleared, they just are housed there until they get an appropriate psychiatric evaluation.
Please conclude. Please conclude your comments.
On my time.
Yes, please conclude.
I'm sorry. Okay. Let me just sum up to say I believe this is an important move for the state of California to better care for their patients by allowing paramedics this opportunity, as they already do it for many, many other more serious complaints. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the phone?
No further comments.
Thank you. Well, now for any more discussion on the board before we go to a before we go to your motion. Jennifer, you want to add anything before we go to your motion?
Only that hearing all of this, kind of our choices are neutral. Kind of means we don't care either way. You can ask for amendments, but they don't necessarily. If you kind of don't care either way, sometimes authors' offices take them, sometimes they don't. Obviously, support if amended is a more positive outlook to take, and you're asking for amendments. I think in this case, our amendments will have to be pretty general because we don't know exactly. There are some areas of concern I'm hearing, and I could work with a board member on our areas of concern, but and then opposed unless amended is we're going to oppose it unless these areas are addressed. So just to kind of give you background on the positions.
Okay, yeah, Dr. Cross, you're waiting to make a motion, but just want to see if anybody else has any comments before we go. Okay, you're on, Howard.
Actually, although I'm pleased to make a motion, quite frankly, I'm torn as to whether to oppose unless amended or support if amended, because I don't think this bill is fully cooked. I know that we're not adequately informed, but I'm also concerned that the bill isn't fully cooked, that the bill may not adequately specify what is the expanded scope of the paramedic. I understand that there's a expanded decision in terms of their ability to make a triage decision, but the bill also speaks about their ability to treat.
Yeah, so it says the language would require IMSA to authorize a local EMS agency to add to its scope of practice for an EMT paramedic those activities necessary for the assessment, treatment, and transport of a patient to a community care facility, and upon approval of a plan to transport a patient to a community care facility.
I understand, but it doesn't specify
it's broad,
what those treatments are.
Right.
Additionally, I'm a bit uninformed as to what the adequacy is of our local mental health acute care centers and sobering centers, and I suspect that without there being a requirement of state or national accreditation, that there probably is quite a variation in terms of the adequacy and the medical staffing of those centers. So I would want the bill to be amended to actually set specific criteria in that there is no accrediting agency for us to fall back on. But do you think, Jennifer, that we would have greater opportunity to work with the author as an oppose unless amended or a support if amended?
I mean, I think either way, most authors' offices will want to work with you. I mean, it's just more like, do you want to take a more positive approach and be like, hey, we really like this bill, but we need these amendments, or we have concerns with this bill, and if they aren't addressed, we're going to oppose them.
Personally, I like the concept of the bill because I do feel that we have an overburdened emergency system and that patients can receive better care if they're sent to appropriate care centers. So I would move support if amended.
We could also support in concept.
Will that allow us to discuss it with the author?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I would move modify my motion to support in concept.
Okay, now we have support in concept with several amendments to come, which we don't know yet, but they should include patient protection, not expansion of the paramedic scope of practice. That is, they need to be supervised by the base station physicians and whoever else supervises them. I think a couple others, but we talked about that. Any other comments? If not, I think, Kim?
I think, Dr. Krause, you also covered the fact of this facility as well. We need that information in there.
Right.
The criteria need to be specified in the bill.
Yeah, I totally understand the people who are supporting it and people who are opposing. It's not a rocket science. I think for us, it is the patient safety that includes patients who will be delayed for being seen when the ERs are overcrowded. So both ways it goes. So it's an issue. So with that, roll call, please.
Dr. Bolat?
Yes.
Dr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Krause?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Pines?
Yes.
Mr. Wormuth?
Aye.
Ms. Wright? Dr. Yip?
Yes.
Dr. Gonadev?
Aye. Motion carries.
Okay.
All right, Jennifer, you got 15 minutes to finish everything.
Okay.
Otherwise, then we
I
got
can make
to
it.
adjourn. Yes.
Okay, so AB 1751 low would allow the Department of Justice to enter into an agreement with an entity operating an interstate data share hub for purposes of participating in interjurisdictional information sharing between prescription drug monitoring programs across state line. So basically, this would allow cures to interact with other state prescription drug monitoring programs. The board has always believed that cures is an important enforcement tool and an effective aid for physicians to use to prevent doctor shopping. This bill will give physicians access to prescription drug information from other states, which will help to further the board's mission of consumer protection, and board staff recommends the board support this bill.
Any comments? Okay, any public comment from the audience here? Comments on the phone?
No comments.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I make a motion to support 1751.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Any? Okay. No private conversation there. Roll call, please.
Dr. Bollat?
Aye.
Dr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Kraus?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Pines?
Yes.
Mr. Wormuth?
Aye.
Ms. Wright? Dr. Yip? Dr. Gonadev?
Aye, and the motion carries. Jennifer?
Okay, AB 1752 low would add Schedule 5 drugs to cures and would authorize the California State Board of Pharmacy to add additional medications to cures through regulations if a medication is determined to pose a substantial risk of abuse or diversion. This bill would also shorten the time frame for pharmacists to report dispense controlled substances to cures from the current 7 days to 1 working day after the date a controlled substance is dispensed. This bill would not add Schedule 5 drugs to the section of law that requires physicians to check the cures database. Therefore, adding Schedule 5 drugs to cures will have a significant impact on dispensers, but not prescribers. In addition, changing the reporting deadline for dispensers will result in up-to-date information in cures and will make it even more of an effective aid for physicians to use to prevent doctor shopping. The board may want to discuss and consider the language that would authorize the Board of Pharmacy to add additional medications to cures through regulations if a medication is determined to pose a risk of abuse or diversion. So I'm leaving it up to the board to discuss this one.
I know you gave us a little way out that it doesn't require the doctors, but God, Schedule 5 drugs, it's cough syrup with codeine in it. It doesn't, but...
It won't require you to check, so the information will be in cure. If this bill were to pass, the information would be input by dispensers, but there would be no requirement that there is going to be soon for you to doctors to actually check that, or prescribers to check that information.
I read Jennifer, I read what the summary was.
Right.
Why is the Board of Pharmacy trying to add cough syrup with codeine in it into really getting into this one? I'm just curious.
So Kim and I met or talked over the phone with Board of Pharmacy, and there is in some circumstances where that cough syrup is being used with other scheduled drugs, and where it's becoming an issue. And there's drugs that are coming out that they're kind of having issues with too.
And it's also being abused. I mean, we've had cases with Prometh with codeine, and so that's kind of the new drug of choice. Whether it's because it does or doesn't have to be entered into cures is questionable, but it is something that's for consumer protection to have it in there. One more thing, as long as doctors aren't having to check, but when they're running cures, they're going to be able to see that for their patient now.
Dr. Lewis.
But Sudafed has been taken care of. You have to show your driver's license, you get a certain supply, and that's it, and we don't really get involved in it. And I just think to put the burden of Robitussin AC seems a little onerous on it. So,
but it's not onerous for physicians. It'll be for the pharmacists to enter the information.
Now,
there you go, Ron.
Yes, Ron.
I think the concern here is that where does it go from here? That's why I'm just plus any other drugs they can add. Is that the other one?
So it would give the Board of Pharmacy they'd have to go through the regulatory process, but they could add other medications, and they'd have to pose a risk for diversion or.
And you can always you can go neutral on this bill. Right. Or you can do neutral if amended as well, because you would want to, if you think that that's not appropriate for the Board of Pharmacy to do that, that could be an amendment you would recommend.
Yeah, Dr. Bola.
Yeah, I am a believer in that Schedule 5, and I will tell you two good reasons. One, there is, believe it or not, that promethazine with codeine is diverted. Not infrequently, it's quite rampant in our homeless population, and in LA, that's 50,000 people. So and I share my concerns of my colleagues on the board regarding something happening where physicians are now going to be responsible for Schedule 5s. That would be something that I would definitely oppose, but I would be in favor for the Schedule 5 appearing, that it would allow me, when I check a cures, how many places this person is going for their medications.
I agree with
Dr.
that totally. I'm seeing that in my practice, yes.
Okay.
I just have one thing I just wanted to say real quick. I had a meeting yesterday on cures, and actually facilities are already entering Schedule 5s. So not all of them, obviously, but there is a number in the care system for those already entering 5. So some facilities are already doing this, some pharmacists.
So our options are either support if amended, or neutral if amended, or neutral. Oppose doesn't sound right, but so just let's see what you think.
I'm going to move to support if amended. Just going to take it out there.
So would the amendment be, I have to kind of know what the amendment would be. Would it be,
The Board of Pharmacy cannot just
Okay.
tack on.
you're okay with the Schedule 5?
Yeah.
Just want to be clear.
Yeah.
Okay, any comments on that? No, let's have a second. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we do have a second. Okay, so any comments from the board? Okay, comments from the audience? Comments on the phone?
No comments.
Thank you. Are we ready to vote? Okay. A roll call, please.
Dr. Bolat?
Aye.
Dr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Kraus?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Pines?
Aye.
Mr. Warmoth?
Aye.
Ms. Wright? Dr. Yip? Dr. Gonadev?
Aye, motion carries. Next one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the last bill.
Thank you, Jennifer.
This bill would require the Department of Justice, beginning January 1st, 2020, to limit the number of approved security printers to 3. And so right now, there's a security printer program with the Department of Justice, and all the prescription pads have to be printed on these secure printers. You might know that there's been kind of a problem with prescription pads being compliant. We've gotten complaints that, that people aren't getting their medications filled because their prescriptions aren't on compliance forms. So this bill would also require the printed prescription forms for controlled substances to include a uniquely serialized number in a manner prescribed by the Department of Justice. And the security printer would have to submit via a web-based application within the next working day the serial number of all prescription forms delivered, all prescriber names and Drug Enforcement Administration controlled registration certificate numbers displayed on the prescription forms, and the delivery and shipment recipient names. So this bill really doesn't directly impact the board because we've kind of seen an issue with this, and we wanted to let you know. We could support it if it's something you want to support. We could be neutral. We don't have to take a position.
If you have only 3 printers,
right?
How are you going to get prescription pads to 145,000 licensees?
Yeah, and I wasn't sure how many there are now and how it would impact it. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't suggest that we support it. We don't have to take a position. Like I said, we could be neutral. I'm not sure of the impact of narrowing those down to 3.
Gee. Any comments from the board?
Yeah,
Dr. Bola.
Yeah, 2 actually. So one, I'm trying to understand these 3 printers in that large number, but the other comment that you made I think is important, because as of 1/1, patients are going to pharmacies and they're not able to get their prescriptions filled because of non-compliant prescription, even though the printing group was tasked with making sure that the paper was correct. The check boxes is a very common problem. Right. So I just wanted to raise that as a second. But I still want to understand, what are the 3
So I think the
printers.
purpose. I mean, we can talk more to the Board of Pharmacy, but I think the purpose is. You're right. Right now, there is a lot more than 3, and prescriptions are being printed and they're not compliant. And so I think the purpose behind this is to narrow it down and really make sure that those three approved security printers are compliant with everything that's required now, and the new serial. Adding the new serial number system, adding additional information on the prescriptions.
Thank you, that clarifies it for me.
How does that affect the electronic prescription, transmission of prescriptions?
It doesn't really affect the, like e-prescribing is what you're talking about. Yeah, it doesn't really affect that. This is the actual printed prescription forms.
Does this board really want to take a position on this? I'm okay if you just say leave it alone.
It's nothing impacting physicians. I guess it would impact you a little bit if you had trouble getting, the forms from the printers, but it's nothing that's going to impact your care and what you're providing. So it's not necessary that we take a position on it.
And if it gets amended at a later point in time where we do think they need to take a position, we can bring it back.
Okay.
It doesn't even have to be a position. It really, we're not going to take a position. I'm just letting you know. It's an FYI.
Okay, let me hear any comments from the audience. Any comments on the phone?
No comments on the phone.
Thank you. Okay, so it dies there. Next one.
Okay, and then that's it for bills. The thing left is the next item, which is the pending regulations.
Well, I do have something here on AB 1650.
That bill actually is a 2-year bill. We already took a position on it. From what I understand, it's going to be tabled, but it's a 2-year bill that we've already taken a position on, so that's why we're not discussing it.
However, we do have public comment, so we do have to allow public comment for it.
Okay, so we have Brandon Klug. Mr. Klug.
Not officially.
Hello, thanks for hearing my comments on this. My name is Brandon Klug. I'm an RN. I'm the Integrated Health Manager for Medic Ambulance Service in Vallejo. I have been managing the daily operations as well as the lead locally for the education for our clinical site, which is a post-discharge model. We work with heart failure and COPD patients. I did provide a handout. All the members of the board should have that. I believe there are some extras if anyone would like those. So I just kind of want to talk about my experiences really quickly. I'm aware of the time. So we've been seeing patients for coming up on 2.5 years now with tremendous results. We have an unplanned readmission rate over a 30-day time period of 6.9%. That's a 58.9% reduction compared to our eligible but not enrolled patient population. We are not a duplication of services. I know that's been one of the biggest concerns over the post-discharge models, is that we are stepping on the toes of other providers, whether it's nurses, home health, physicians, or that we're steering patients away from hospitals or any of those other services. That's not our intention. We're gap fillers. So what we do is we actually work with the local hospitals. The patients are referred to us, and we help them kind of maintain the compliance and reinforce the education of their post-discharge plan. We do this by completing a medication inventory analysis. We are not reconciling their meds. We are taking inventory, and we are sharing that information with the referring hospital, the patient's primary care providers, and any specialists that we're made aware of that the patient has. We also review those instructions and directions with the patient. We do not advise them to take their medications differently or to change their follow-up in any way. We don't do any of that. We actually reinforce exactly what that plan is. When there is any discrepancy, such as we found so far, a 53.1% rate of medication errors in the patient's homes. We've also found a 73.8% discrepancy in the patient's understanding their discharge instructions. So we're not trying to change those. We're saying follow these plans, and when there are questions or concerns, then what we're doing is we're advising the patients to follow up with their medical doctors on these points. We're helping them navigate that system by encouraging to call their doctors and reconcile these issues while we're in their homes. That way we're kind of coaching them into the life skills of how to self-manage by trying to improve their health literacy. We also, I think we do a phenomenal job at, we're not trying to diagnose anything. I know that there's been some concerns over that. We're not diagnosing with them with anything. And I think we do a really good job of helping them manage their disease, such as those patients that have readmitted. We've seen a 78.1% reduction in them readmitting for heart failure or COPD specifically. So I just would ask that you do reconsider your opposed stance on AB 1650. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Klug, and forgive me for butchering your name. As a person whose name gets butchered all the time, I understand the pain. Next one is item number 11B, status of regulatory actions. Ms. Simos.
So I'm just here to answer any questions that people might have on the matrix.
Boy, Jennifer, you know how to escape, huh? Does board member have any questions to Ms. Simos? They're all hungry. Yeah. Any comments from the audience? Any comments on the phone?
No comments on the phone.
Thank you, and we stay adjourned till 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.